Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Soccer for Us. I'm Bart, and we've got a lot to talk about, including 2 USMNT January friendlies, the sporting departures from US Soccer, and a new strategic partnership between Concacaf and our neighbors to the south, CONMEBOL, that will bring a major tournament to the States. Joining me on this episode is a man who goes by US Keeper on Twitter, but Thomas in real life. Thomas, as the grand historian of U.S. soccer, these past couple months will definitely be ones to note in the history books.
Yeah, there's a lot of transition right now with the federation and a lot of movement. It comes at a kind of a not a great time, but I mean, I guess if you're going to have that transition at the beginning of the cycle is probably where you want to figure things out before you head into the second half of it.
Yeah. You know what? Let's talk about this at the front of the podcast, because we can talk about the January friendlies, and like I got to be real honest, the takeaways are that they happened. There's not a whole lot. So let's jump right into this. I mean, I guess where I stand is just as you said, it's glad that this happened at the beginning of the cycle. And I think that the good work that they put in up until now has shown to even help set us up for good things in the future. But if you're unaware of what happened, news broke last week that Ernie Stewart will depart the U.S. Soccer Federation and return to Netherlands to join PSV Eindhoven, which, if you're not aware, is a very good club in the Netherlands. Also, in the same press conference that happened last Thursday, it was officially confirmed that Brian McBride will move on from the general manager position after 3 years. Also, action item after that is that U.S. Soccer has started their search for the sporting director, and a strategic review of the sporting department is both ongoing and will continue. So what does that mean? Well, it means that U.S. Soccer does not currently have a sporting director, and it means that the U.S. men's national team program does not currently have a full-time senior head coach or a full-time general manager. So right off the bat, Thomas, those are 3 big vacancies within just the sporting department and the sporting side of U.S. soccer. But it does seem like U.S. soccer is focused on trying to determine if all of those positions are even needed. Is that how kind of you read into this a little bit, with the hiring of the sportsology group to help not only do that internal review, but also hire the sporting director and kind of help hire the coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're doing a full review of the hierarchy with on the U.S. men's national team side to see really what's needed to drive the balance there, because you have to wonder if this the GM or the technical the sporting technical director is something that maybe one of the coaches could do,
right?
Maybe the head coach could do, or is there a balance between the 2 roles where that the sporting director can facilitate some of those job responsibilities? Because I mean, they essentially created some of these positions in the last cycle to support just changes to the federation and things they wanted to do, and I think it's good to evaluate them for sure, and obviously with McBride and Stewart leaving, it's an opportune time to evaluate that, to see really what's needed and where those roles and responsibilities will fall.
Yeah, I think 2 things. One, Ernie Stewart was obviously the first time full-time sporting director of U.S. soccer. Now, obviously, Jurgen Klinsmann was the technical director. I never was clear if that was over the whole sporting side or just the men's program, but he was also the head coach at that time. So Ernie Stewart, that sporting director position came directly from the creation of it, was caused by the catastrophe in Cuba, almost 5 years now. So I do think that, one, we need to say that it was a positive to have someone who is overarchingly over the actual sporting side of U.S. soccer, which I know sounds weird that it's a soccer organization, but there's a lot of stuff that doesn't happen on the actual sporting side of things. And I mean that at the senior level or the national team level. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with administration. But this is direct stuff that the federation as a whole is in charge of, and that's the senior national teams, the youth national teams, that kind of stuff. But what we found, I guess, and what kind of has been revealed is that there were a lot of redundancies for that corporate term between Stewart, McBride, and Berhalter. Now, you mentioned in the last podcast that obviously McBride was in charge of the youth national team setup. Mostly that was his job. Do you see that possibly either they don't bring back? I think it's unlikely they don't hire a new sporting director. They pretty much said that in the press release. But do you think it's likely that there's not a general manager of the men's national team side? We have one for the women's side.
Yeah, I think it's a good question to examine and see what the best role is. I've been doing a little research on the history of kind of some of the coaching and the organizational executive structure over time, and it's an odd situation. I think personally, I think you could hire and I think I said this in the last pod as well, you could hire like the U23 manager to facilitate and do that role as well as coach, because the U23s only pretty much play for half the cycle, and it's
Right.
between now and in the Olympics. And I think that's where you have to really, find that dual opportunity. I mean, I love what Tab did when he was in that role, because he did that very well for what, three or probably to a two,
Right.
two-ish cycles. But within the cycle for youth, it's broken up in 2 cycles, for youth per the larger cycle. So I think they'll get creative in that manner, because I think you need some sort of continuity and stability there,
Yeah.
within that, because they've got to figure out how they're going to conduct business for the next 2 years in terms of the youth tournaments this year and then the Olympics next year, because there's going to be a balance of those players that are hopefully going to be part of the Olympic team.
Right. And I think to build off of that point, the whole goal, I think, of the youth national team structure is obviously to develop players and bring them eventually to the senior national team. Now, obviously, you and I both know, and people listening probably know, that doesn't always happen. You're not always getting a linear progression from, oh, well, you were on the 17s, now you're on the 20s, and now you're at the 23s, now you're at the senior team. So it does kind of make sense to have someone who's in charge of making sure that the youth programs are being run efficiently, the development is done effectively, and that progression is as cohesive as possible. So that totally makes sense. My question is, does the sporting director need to be a guy like Ernie Stewart? Because Ernie Stewart is formerly an administrator, a president, and general manager of an MLS team. So he has been very involved with the daily runnings of a club, and a lot of that involved the actual sporting side of things, the playing of the game. What if it's more of a kind of an administrative role than a, like, I don't know, similar to like athletic director, rather than like someone who's really in charge of sports? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because you really, there has to be accountability for managers. So whoever the manager ends up being, there needs to be, that sporting director is the boss of the manager.
Right.
That's the progression of how that needs to be. So I think that's where that's critical. I think that's where that's needed, and what that's going to represent, what collaboration, because in my opinion, you can't have, U.S. Soccer has done this for 60 years for the most part, off and on, where they've had their organization select rosters, make decisions as committees. Okay, so say what you want about the Greg Berhalter era, but Greg seemed to have a full responsibility and full ability to make those selections. I'm sure he had his opportunities for input along the way, but he ultimately was making those decisions from everything that I had, and everyone had probably witnessed. And so, right or wrong, that's what the role needs to be, with the caveat, he has to run it by that sporting director, and there needs to be some accountability there, and someone you respect, and someone that has experience in making sure that you are questioning things, you are making progressions, you are doing those things to improve the program and be successful.
Yeah, and that's where I just wonder, because like to kind of go back to my athletic director idea. Some athletic directors are former athletes at that university who are great, or former coaches at the university who are great. A lot of them, though, come from just the general business and administrative side of things. And they're really effective because they're not as involved with the actual playing of the sport. So, for example, Ernie Stewart obviously knew Greg Berhalter from their playing days, but just as a man who played soccer at a very high level, would have a little bit of and it's an inherent bias, but an emotional and just kind of sporting attachment to results, right? Does it make sense to have someone who's a little bit more like looking at the big picture, kind of more of a business thing? Because look, we've been a part of, or at least I've been a part of, fandoms that have gone through periods where coaches aren't performing as well, and that athletic director has said, no, we're staying with them, or no, they're being fired because they're not doing their job correctly. I'm just wondering if that type of guy who's more of an administrator makes sense, or if it does need to be an Ernie Stewart type, or I mean, here in Atlanta we have Garth Lagerwey, who's still very involved, obviously, with player signings and roster building. So I'm just wondering which side of that pendulum do you think is best for the swing, or is that what sportsology is supposed to do?
Yeah, I think sportsology is probably going to try to identify where that best fits into the program. I mean, I don't know what other programs do, to be, sadly, it's hard to kind of find
For
that.
reference, Liga MX, El Tri, the Federation, Mexican Federation, does have a sporting director and then two positions like we had of like directors of the men's and women's side of things, but those are separate from the head coach of the senior team.
Okay, so they're following a similar structure, right, that exists at least in for another Concacaf team, and I think you have to figure what the role is going to be. The role, that's the key. What's the role? What's the responsibility of these positions, and what you're trying to get out of that? Because I think from a GM perspective, it's straightforward. I think we understand what that represents.
And I think we need that. I think we need that. That is separate than the senior national team, right? Because they are busy.
Right. Well, it is, and I think that's where I think that's where the collaboration needs to be a little bit more. I would have liked to have seen, a little bit more collaboration, transparency with, McBride and Berhalter, kind of, working together. But the pandemic kind of screwed things up from that perspective. McBride did not get the opportunities that he wanted. But I think they got to change that role a little bit. But you have to, I don't know. The Federation is very obsessed with having like this concept of like, the old guard in there in some sort of like soccer mentality. And I think you need a balance of that. I think you have to have that balance of like the coach is going to coach the players and provide, that game plan per se. And then, this other person can maybe question things and maybe, look at it from more of the athletic director type of perspective. You have to balance that a little bit more. And I don't know, Ernie, I think Ernie and McBride, a lot of ways, are kind of in the background. We didn't hear a lot from them, and maybe that's fine, but I don't know.
And look, I do want to say that as much as people love, and this is their favorite pastime on Twitter, to bash U.S. soccer and everything that it's done, I'm going to be quite blunt with you all. I thought that Ernie Stewart put together a very good program for both the men's and women's national teams. I don't necessarily think that they were as successful as we would want them to be, but putting together a good platform, a good structure, doesn't always equal success. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, honestly, I think maybe he set the table for the next person to come in to do that, because it really wasn't there before. And so I think that's to be commended from what Ernie did, and hopefully it can continue. But I don't want to wait 6 months for it either, though. That's the crazy thing.
So that's the next question, though, is like, does this timeline make sense? Because in the press conference that followed this press release, Cindy Parlow-Cone essentially said that they want to have a full-time national team coach named by the end of summer, which right now is the end of January. The end of summer would be, I'm assuming not like literally September 22nd, but like, probably by the end of the Gold Cup. After that, between then and the September friendlies, you're going to have a new head coach named. They have stated they want a sporting director in charge by the Women's World Cup, which I don't really understand the benefit of having it by that point unless it's like months in advance. But I think just from a perspective, you want to have that. So we're looking at possibly not getting either until July. Does that timeline make sense at all?
It's not what I'd want, but I guess you look at it this way. I mean, you have to trust the process for as much as I'm skeptical of the process. Yeah. And so, and this is where my fandom and what I've seen happen and what I've researched that have happened, it really just, it falls in line with everything we've seen. There's no change in this. And so now, why I don't want them to be quick in making a decision. I also don't want them to, wait forever too, because what are you missing in the meantime? Like, right. You can't tell me that there's not someone on the board that's saying, geez, what about manager ABC? Because trust me, we saw that with Klinsmann back in the day. They had this guy sitting 6 months out before he would end up, replacing Bradley, in the wings. Okay. He was there ready to go. And so when you had that, to me, that was right or wrong. That was people on the board saying, well, be ready, because we're tired of Bradley and what he's doing or not doing, and have this ready. So to me, to not have that there is a little odd to me. Either that, they already have something in mind.
It would be two things. One, I'm going to go back a little bit to my athletic director kind of thing, and any athletic director has somewhere in a filing cabinet, maybe in their desk drawer, a list of potential coaches that they're calling as soon as they have to fire their men's head basketball coach and their football coach. You know what I'm saying? Like, they have a list already before the guy's even fired, it's just the best practice to make sure you're prepared for anything that happens. So I'm very hopeful that Ernie Stewart and U.S. Soccer would have had a list of coaches already in mind, knowing that you were coming into a World Cup, you were coming up to the end of Greg Berhalter's contract. And to be quite honest, as much as I love to hear that they're talking to Jose Mourinho, or apparently talking to Marcelo Bielsa, and reached out to Zidane, I don't know if those make a whole lot of sense in terms of like realistic hires that you would go after. Those are the ones that you're going to go talk to for sure. And if they say yes, you're fantastically grateful. But like, where is that list of we think this guy will be a really good replacement when that time comes for Berhalter? And I'm wondering, one, did we have that with Stewart? And two, does that still fall into place because Stewart's gone?
You would think if he's doing his job, he's having that, because the reality is this: you have to evaluate your current manager, and then you have to look about what's available in the marketplace and what you might want to do. Like, and so you can't tell me you can't tell me Greg Berhalter is everything. There's always that dream manager. Now, I think these are just rumors that are throwing out there. Just say, well, we talked to him. We had 33 candidates last time. Yeah, but you interviewed 2. And so so to me, that doesn't line up. So, because you're not really doing your due diligence to make sure that you are evaluating the best possible, candidates. And look, I don't mind the summer thing, because I guess you look at that because there's going to be managers that become available at that point. And so that piece of it from a manager perspective, I guess I'm okay, but you've got to be talking with them now. And so who's doing that? Someone's got to be.
Right. And that's where I'm more concerned with getting that sporting director in as soon as possible. And I'm really hopeful that JT Batson or Cindy Parlow-Cone or somebody within U.S. Soccer has contingency plans for who that sporting director would be. Because it would, look, Ernie Stewart, as much as he played for the U.S., is a Dutch American man. He's a Dutch man. That he is from the Netherlands. That is his home. His family still live there. He is going back home. That is not a crazy thing to think of. And again, not crazy to think that after the World Cup, he would have dipped anyway. So where is your list? Not what Sportsology is putting together for you. What is your list? Surely you could have looked around Major League Soccer. And I'm sorry to talk about Major League Soccer. I know no one likes to actually hear that can be successful, but surely you've looked around U.S. Soccer, Major League Soccer, USL, whatever, and said, hey, we like what this dude has done as sporting director at X club. right? Or president of X Club. I think of like Tim Bezbachenko at Columbus Crew, Ernst Tanner, obviously at Philadelphia. Again, Atlanta just stole Garth Lagerwey from Seattle, but there are a lot of club presidents and sporting directors who have done a very good job that you think are they the type of person who could lead our organization? Because again, that could be a very athletic director-ish hire, right? We're just getting someone who's good at managing the day-to-day operations, making sure everything's falling into place. Or do you have your list of the international people who are really going to set the tone for the sporting development of the country? And so I still think that they should have had contingency plans that went both directions. Like surely it's not, wow, Ernie Stewart's gone, we don't know what to do. I'm really hoping that that's not the case here.
Yeah, I mean, because it makes me think of like how like Major League Baseball has their general manager and those sorts of things. Like the next guy, like, geez, that guy's available or he's not available. Let's talk to him.
Yeah.
Guys come out of contract all the time, so like to think you have to wait till someone's out of contract
Right.
to hire them and for them to start is ridiculous because it happens all the time. And so if you're doing that, then which is what they did with Greg and kind of what they did with Stewart is like, well, wait, we'll get you out, a little bit. Like you have to do it now. You have to be selfish for the federation. Okay, if you're trying to help Major League Soccer, fine, help Major League Soccer, but you have to help yourself first.
Right.
And so if you see that candidate, you got to go get him. If that's your candidate, you go get him.
Especially, I think, for that sporting director position, because again, that dude or whoever is going to drive the direction of the new coaching search. Obviously, like I think that's what I'm hoping that they get the sporting director in as soon as possible, because that will take a long round of interviewing. Like I think that should be a very good intense interview process for this federation to find their new person. But again, I think that you need to be I'm going to take a line from the legendary coach John Wooden: be quick but don't hurry. You don't want to hastily make a decision, but you do need to quickly get to a decision. You need to fill that hole, because he leaves on February 15th. I think it's the date. You got, in my personal view, you have your sporting director hired before the Nations League finals in June, so that you can have that person talking to, as you mentioned, those European coaches who now become available over the summer.
Right, and that's critical in my opinion. Like if a manager get it picked up now, they're going to get picked up. If not, they may get they may get picked up partway through the season. But at this point, if you're kind of holding on to that, job, you're probably going to hold. Most likely, unless you completely crap the bed, you're going to probably hold off until the end of the season to be able to do that. And then at that point, the seasons are over. You can talk to the manager, because here's the thing. And again, this is what worries me a little bit. Not that I don't think it's a time to bring an American manager out of the MLS again. I think you have to take a different approach to that.
I agree.
So I'm hopeful that they're not just like dragging this out, saying, "Well, we'll hire a manager at the end of we'll announce it, but then they won't start until sometime in October, November when their team's out of play." Which again is the same.
Yeah.
Like we can't continue that insanity. We have to go ahead and make those. Again, I guess if that's your candidate, that's your candidate. But to me, the going down that route is not smart.
I'm going to be just blunt. There's not an MLS coach that I would want to coach this national team. There's just not. That said, again, as I mentioned, like if you're hiring a sporting director from the MLS ranks, I'm okay with that, because again, they're a little bit more used to, or a president from the MLS ranks, they're used to what this setup will be and operating within this setup. But I don't see a coach in MLS. Don't even come at me with Jim Curtin. Don't come at me with Peter. No, there's not a coach in MLS that I would view as ready to take on the men's national team for a full time. You have selected this coach process.
Yeah, you've got to go a different route. You're hosting it. I know you want them, and that's the thing. They want American in every single area of this. And I think you have to have a point counterpoint. You have to have someone that's going to question those things. I think you had a lot of yes type of responses from Burrow Hall. I mean, all these guys had ties together. They played each other one time. So you have to have a little bit of that questioning ability within there. Someone that's going to make you accountable and think about those moves. Because I don't think Greg was again, he did very well, but I don't think he was pushed or questioned along the way. You know, you saw it. I think he had an ego towards the end for sure, and he was not going to, go off that. And I think you have to have someone questioning that along the way, in that,
Yeah. And honestly, maybe that GM role is perfect for an outsider who has a long history of youth coaching in Europe or academy directing in Europe, right? Where their goal is to progress kids from, and instill a certain style of play from point A to point B. Maybe that's a great opportunity for a foreign person to come in and really help. I mean, even if you're looking at a guy from like Mexico or South America who has a history of again, youth coaching and youth development, that might be a great opportunity for them to come in and be not so involved with the U.S. senior team, but be involved with the whole process and be another, just as you said, a voice of opposition at times. Because I do find it very hard to believe that Berhalter and Stewart butted heads a lot.
Yeah, I don't think they did, and I think having that and defining that vision for what your youth's gonna do, program's gonna be. I mean, there's a reason Tab left is because I don't think, from everything I heard and read, his vision was not their vision.
Right.
So, and while he was very successful, it just wasn't going to work, in that form. So, he had to leave, and he wanted the manager position, and I think, I don't think he was, ready for it at that time. I don't know if he's ready for it now, but I like Tab and what he brought to that, and someone of that nature, of that caliber, I think needs to be put in that position where they can, work with those groups along the way. I don't know who that is though. That's the thing. Like I don't have I mean, I can name some people.
I don't either, because those specifically are just too broad of nets for me to cast.
Right.
Like I don't have a name of guys who I think would be great youth national team coaches. Like it boggles me how people have hard opinions on a youth national team coach when it's just like, unless they were a club coach somewhere before, like Rafa Wicki is a good example. But like most of these guys are just like someone who used to be a youth coach somewhere else. It's not like they're and youth. There's such an opportunity here for at all three of these positions to really take this program forward, and especially with the men's national team coach, to evolve again the way that the world thinks about U.S. soccer at the 2026 World Cup. I mean, I think you and I are both pretty high on our chances to make a good run at that World Cup because we're at home. What concerns me, and this has been, I think, a big topic on Twitter, is, and I get what people are concerned about the length of the timeline. I am too. But what I'm trying to weigh is, what is the downside of not having a full-time USMNT coach in place for this summer? We've got the Nations League finals in June, hopefully. We do still have to qualify. And we've got Gold Cup in July. If we don't have our full-time coach in place for those tournaments, what are we missing out on? And is that an altogether terrible thing?
I'm all about continuity. I'm all about the growth of it. I mean, it's still a young group. So I think any opportunity and time you can have with a new coach to get into a tournament before Copa America tournament, is really going to set the tone, because that's kind of what you have. You have two phases of this cycle. You know what I mean? You've got Copa America, and then you got the World Cup. And so I think you have to be able to show well in that. And mind you, if they don't get one before the Gold Cup, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world.
I got to be real honest. I don't think you could throw out a lot of coaches for the U.S. men's national team and El Tri, to be quite honest, and coach our players that are going to be playing in that Gold Cup, and you're going to get similar results.
Yeah, I think you get similar results. I mean, I am a little.
I don't trust Anthony Hudson, but
that's the problem. I mean, I still want my team to win and to be successful, and I think that's important as well. I think they have to have that continued success in winning culture. So I'm concerned about the March Nations League. I'm concerned about, because I mean,
I am, and I'm not.
While they're winnable,
you
know what I mean. Anything can happen. You know what I mean, with that sort of thing. I mean, if they should take care of business against Grenada, but against El Salvador, anything's possible. I think. I mean, I think that all they need is a draw, right? On that, or
so we have 4 points.
they have 5.
El
Right?
Salvador has 5. So if we beat Grenada, which is the first game, Grenada's eliminated. Even if Grenada beats us and like their goal differential is too big. So like really we have to beat Grenada and just not lose to El Salvador.
Right.
And we're in. And even that we just have to, if we tie both of those games, we're in. Or if we lose to Grenada, like there's a lot of like, there's a lot that could happen. I even think if we beat Grenada and lose to El Salvador, if we lose to Grenada and tie it, there's a lot of things that we can still make it in because of our goal differential. But I'm with you. Like, listen, I'm nervous for Anthony Hudson to screw it up in March, but I'm also looking at just the pure talent on our roster and going, it's going to be hard for me to see how this group of players, if you select our 23 best players, are going to somehow not make a Nations League final in June.
Yeah, I don't know the players' mentality with that in general. I think they'll they'll likely go through, but I am concerned though. I mean, it's just another level of that because you have to just that winning culture. You've got, in my opinion, you're the United States. I don't care who's coaching you. You need to be in 1-2 every time. And
in this confederation, you better be the top 2. And that was again the thing that with Berhalter finishing 3rd in qualifying. I'm sorry that's still a disappointment. I mean there was no reason for that. And this, I think for me personally, to kind of go back to that original question, if you don't have a full-time head coach in place for the Gold Cup, I don't care because our first team players aren't playing. We're talking about guys who are going to. This is what I kind of, and we'll talk about this when we get into the breakdown of the January friendlies. The margins right now to make this roster are so fine because I think we have 18 guys who are pretty solidly in the roster. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's some turnover, obviously, but even that turnover doesn't need to happen right now. Like, I don't think it's imperative that we find the Kellen Acosta replacement by July. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I don't know if we can either, because no one's really shown. So the Nations League, though, is where I would rather have our full-time head coach in charge because they're going to be working with our best players, building that system, building that culture, as you said. The Gold Cup is, especially this summer, is just so meh anyway.
Yes, I don't know about that though. I think based on the timing of it, you might have the opportunity to get your number 1 players in that because it's at the early it's at the earlier. I think it starts in late June.
It does start late June. That ends July 16th.
Yeah, so you could easily take the European players and plop them in there because that's usually how it's scheduled. The first Gold Cup of the cycle is where you usually see the A team for the United States,
right?
And then the other one usually falls a month later in the second half of the cycle, and you usually see the MLS group.
I just wonder with the Nations League still happening if clubs will want their. I mean, granted, I think they have to because they're both FIFA's windows, but like
they're 2 separate. Yeah,
I could very much see them saying, "Hey, Wes, hey, Tyler, hey, Brendan, hey, even Matt Turner, we don't need you for the Gold Cup type thing." Now, that said, I think that there are guys who are, like I said, in that 18 that might benefit from being in the Gold Cup and might be good for them to take on more of a starting role. But
they might want it, and they might want it too. That's the other thing.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. If they want it, I mean, I want them to be there because I do want to see the best. I want to see them play at that level because I think they still want trophies. I still think they want to win that. So I think
absolutely,
yeah. I think you'll see more of an A squad to unless something drastic.
I hope so. That would be fun to watch. Before we move on to some other news that we need to talk about, I do want to just point out that U.S. Soccer said, and I don't disbelieve them. Let's put it that way. The decisions of Stewart and McBride were made independently of each other and were not impacted by U.S. Soccer's process for naming the next USMNT coach or the ongoing investigation. Now, here's my take on that. I don't think that, one, we know that McBride apparently self-reported said he was going to be done by this time anyway. He had kind of already let them know back in October before the World Cup that he was going to be moving on, which I have no reason not to believe that. that makes sense. He probably saw that the end of the cycle was coming, time to move on. And I'm fine with that. Ernie, I don't think it was because of anything the investigation caused, but I don't think it wasn't because of the situation that happened during the World Cup. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I think he probably was like, I can go live back home with my family for a phenomenally gifted club team, be very comfortable for a lot of many years, and not have to deal with that bull crap.
Yeah, there was rumblings there. I mean, I think in the press conference they even asked about an extension, which Cohn was like, I think we extended him, and it's like, well, wait a minute, like, you think? I mean, you should know that. And so, I think it's one of those things where he, like, when you're ready, the job's ready for you type of thing a little bit too. So I think there's probably a combination of, like, there was some rumblings. He had to do, he had the contract so he could be there if he wanted to be, but then I think it was in tandem, honestly. It's like, yeah, I kind of thought about it. Now everything else is going down. It kind of makes my decision a little bit easier to kind of.
I mean, obviously PSV came to him. Like, they were the ones who announced it first. Like, they clearly wanted him. But yeah, I think he was like, I got this opportunity over here, I'm going to take it.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, and to me, I think if you're thinking that from McBride's standpoint, from Stewart's standpoint, I mean, maybe they're keeping that to themselves, but I'd be surprised. They seem like a pretty open, trio there, and I'm sure there's communication. It also
makes sense. Again, you're at the start of a new cycle. Now is the natural breaking point for all of it, anyway.
Right, and I think that's smart. I'm hoping it's not because of the Greg situation. I'm hoping it was truly that case, because they realize the value of saying cycle's over. Like, and so, but if I'm Ernie, just as you mentioned earlier, you think Ernie might have a list of people that might be replacing him that he'd recommend.
Right. He probably has thought about it. Or guys like, I think this guy would be good. Yeah, absolutely. I hope
because you have to, and maybe he's going to do that here in the next 2 weeks.
Maybe that's what he's staying on to help with.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Here's a list of candidates. Go ahead and interview them along the way. Because I tell you, I will say, you mentioned his name earlier, but Gareth Lagerwey there. Yeah, I mean, he was one of the candidates that I was interested for the GM role. Back in 2018. On there, he got mentioned. When he was in Seattle, obviously, he got stolen.
We have him now in Atlanta. He can't leave. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
at least for a year until we find out if he's good or not.
Yeah, I mean, he's interesting. He was an interesting candidate to me, a little bit outside the box, and I'm curious. I'm following his, what he's doing, because
I tell you, that's a great chance here, though. Kate Markgraf.
Maybe. I mean, that's not.
I mean, again, if you're talking about more of an administrative and just athletic department, director type of role, I think that makes a whole lot of sense for Kate Markgraf to move up to that, who clearly also has, by watching the U.S. women's youth national teams, they've played with a much more consistent style of play than anything we've seen from the men's national team. And they've been better at it. They got unlucky at the last couple World Cups, but she clearly has a vision for the way that she wants soccer to be played that I don't think, maybe that was because of Ernie Stewart telling her, but again, they've done a pretty decent job there. So I'm just saying.
No, I mean, that's a natural progression on that. I mean, why not? I mean, because I do wonder. There was I don't want to say a rumor, but I had heard that McBride was interested in another position within U.S. Soccer that either no longer was available or had been filled, I guess. And that's part of the reason why he also left too, because he didn't receive that, that position. I don't know much details behind that, but I had heard that along the way. And so that's kind of interesting too, because I don't know if that was Ernie's job and they're like, yeah, you're not going to, that's not available for you along the way. So I don't really know what the role was. I would assume it would be something of that nature, but because his background is minimal anyway for.
Yeah, it really was. And it still kind of is. Yeah. But let's move on. We've talked enough about the drama within U.S. soccer and the future. Let's talk about something else that's happening in the future. It was announced on Friday, the day after this heartbreaking and weird news from U.S. soccer. We get this fantastically wonderful news that Concacaf and CONMEBOL have agreed to a strategic partnership. I love these things. Essentially what's happening is we're getting 3 tournaments between the 2 countries. The Concacaf region and the CONMEBOL region are going to be bringing teams together for major tournaments. CONMEBOL's men's Copa America will be played in the Concacaf region in 2024 and will include all 10 CONMEBOL nation teams as per usual and 6 CONCACAF guest teams. So just as we saw in 2016, the 6 CONCACAF national teams will have the opportunity to qualify for this competition through the 2023-2024 CONCACAF Nations League. Aren't we excited to watch more Nations League this fall? And also the 2024 Men's Copa America will be hosted in the U.S. And it only mentioned the United States, by the way, not Canada or Mexico, only the U.S. So that's one. Second thing, the 2024 CONCACAF Women's Gold Cup, the W Gold Cup, will include 8 CONCACAF women's national teams and 4 CONMEBOL guests, which is 12 teams total. I don't know word on how those 4 will be selected. I would imagine they're the 4 highest rated. So that basically means Brazil is now going to be part of the CONCACAF W Gold Cup, which is essentially awesome. And no word on where that will be hosted, but very likely a tournament of that size will be in the United States. That's just my guess. The confederations will create a new competition that will include the participation of the best men's clubs in South America and CONCACAF. This has been described as like a Final Four event. So again, we don't know how, but the likelihood is you have the Copa Libertadores finalist and runner-up and the CONCACAF Champions League finalist and runner-up meeting in a centralized location for, a semifinal and final. So those are 3 things that are really, really cool. I want to add something to this because this is something that the Mexican Football Federation announced on their Twitter, I believe today. They put out a graphic with no real details, but put out a graphic that a, quote, big event of high-level competition in the summer of 2025 in North America. So Confederations Cup, that's what that sounds like. And it specifically said that it will be to test out and prepare venues for the World Cup in 2026. So
I did not see that. That's got me excited because I love the Confederations Cup.
Whether it's Confederations Cup or something of that nature, I can't imagine it's going to be much different.
Yeah,
that's exciting.
I mean, I just wanted to see an expanded 16 teams is what I wanted. I loved the tournament. I think it was great. It just gave you more soccer in general. But,
right. So, Thomas, I mean, look, let's start first with the we'll start first with the club competition. Okay, we'll start there, kind of work our way up. It's been no secret that Liga MX has really wanted to be part of Copa Libertadores for a while. They did play in it for a time, but the South American Confederation and their teams and their member federations didn't really like that. So this is a way to kind of let them be separate, but then come together. I think this is pretty cool.
I think it's great. I mean, I was just so excited to hear about that because I think MLS, look, they're kind of becoming a little stagnant a little bit, and I think this here it's going to give them more exposure. It's going to give them more competition, and I think that's what they need to see more of to grow the league in a different manner, not so much from a player perspective, but from a competition perspective,
and I think in a different market.
Well, exactly. So you're going to be in a different market. You're going to be seen by people are going to be seeing, the players are going to be seeing those things. So I think you're tapping into maybe a whole other market that hasn't really been aware that it's there. And I'm excited to see that. I really think it's brilliant, brilliant to be able to collaborate. Yeah.
And I think the way that MLS specifically recruits in South America, it'll be really cool if I don't know exactly, but I'm going to be very. It's going to be very. I'm gonna find it very hard that they're not going to find a way to get both a Liga MX and an MLS team into this. You know what I'm saying? We know how CONCACAF operates.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
So what it will be cool is, like, again, we have all these MLS teams with South American talent going to play in South America. I mean, Atlanta United, for the longest time, we had Joseph Martinez, a Venezuelan. You had Miguel Almiron, a Paraguayan. Right now we have Thiago Almada, who's from Argentina, played for a big club down there. Like, if, for example, You think of Thiago Almada with Atlanta United going down to play, I don't know, Independiente or River Plate or Boca with an Argentinian on your team. That's kind of cool. You think of the same way with Seattle is now going to the Club World Cup. Well, they've got multiple South American stars on their team, leading their team. That's cool.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I actually see it probably, if it's successful, which I would be shocked if it wasn't. The only thing is the logistics kind of get a little, a little challenging a little bit on that. And
I've heard is that, do you remember when the first UEFA Nations League kind of did this, but they did it for the 2020 Champions League and Europa League, where they had a city that could have two stadiums. They did it in I believe Lisbon, because you had Benfica and Sporting, and they played at those two separate venues and then played the final at one of the venues as well. So what I've heard is they're going to do something like that, where I could see, for example, you have LA, right, where you have the new Ram Stadium and maybe the Rose Bowl, or maybe you do LA and San Francisco. So you have those two outdoor stadiums and the finals in LA. So that's the way I've been told, or not been told necessarily. I've heard from other people reporting and read that it will happen, which is cool.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. My original thought is that it's going to grow even beyond that, and then that's where the logistics kind of get a little bit challenging on that. But I think they can figure it out. I mean, it's just a scheduling thing. If you're going to do something on maybe on a Champions League level, with the South America. I mean, I again, it's all about money at the end of the day. For these confederations,
all about money.
You know what I mean? There's a reason why they're okay with the 2024 Copa America being in the United States.
Right, and I think that's where it is personally, I kind of hope this thing rotates, right? I think it would be very stupid for the first one to not be in the United States specifically. Obviously, I'm an American, I'm going to think that way, but you could do a Dallas-Houston pairing and then have a final in either Dallas or Houston. You're going to get a ton of people show up. But then, I think it would be really cool to have the next one in Argentina or Brazil, and pick, Rio or Sao Paulo, or you pick Buenos Aires, and you have the same setup where you have, a stadium for each game and then a final in one central stadium. That's going to bring a lot of people there. And, for me as a fan of an MLS club, if I know that my team is going to be there well in advance in Buenos Aires for a good 5 days, well, that's an easy trip for me to plan,
Yeah, I mean, fans want to do that. I mean, that's the thing. That's the great thing about this. Yeah. There's a ton of fans in America for soccer. Okay, yeah. They want this. I mean, they really do. And I think it's an easy. I just think it's an easy opportunity to grow that game for a number of levels. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the first pass goes with it, and see what they evolve with, because I think it's good for both.
Well, speaking of fans wanting something more, the Concacaf W Gold Cup adding 4 CONMEBOL teams is, I think, something that fans may not have been asking for necessarily, but will really benefit from in a couple of ways. One is, to be quite honest, outside of the top 3 teams in CONCACAF on the women's side, the competition is just not very good. I'm sorry. I can appreciate Haiti. I can appreciate some of these other teams, but you have the U.S. and Canada, you have Costa Rica, Mexico, you have Jamaica. There's 5 teams that are decent, but Canada, U.S., and then those 3, and then after that, it's not a very good quality competition. This makes that slightly better, right? You're talking about now bringing in Brazil. The other 3 teams might be Colombia, Argentina, Chile. Those are 4 very strong teams that you can bring, and as a fan, I now get to watch just better games. And for the teams, we're talking about better games. And then also from a fan standpoint, if I'm CONCACAF, now I don't know how they'll do this. I was kind of playing around with venues in my head, but I still think you're using MLS-sized venues for these games. But you're talking about packing a 20,000 Austin Q2 stadium for Brazil versus, I don't know, Jamaica. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think we're seeing a similar, a similar path for the women's CONCACAF as we saw with the men's when they started. They started pulling in teams from South America and a
Yeah.
couple from the Asian, Confederation, and they're bringing them in there to again create more competition because the women need more competition. You know what I
Yes.
mean? They need
More
more
high level
competition.
competition.
Yeah, and they need that so they can continue progressing and growing because it is getting better, but they've got to find that rhythm. So again, that's a good partnership to do that.
Yeah.
Fans want to see that. It's expanding the tournament as well. So I'm excited to see how that looks because I think it's just another good opportunity for the growth where I think the women have to kind of keep their pencils sharpened and make sure that
Yeah.
they're not falling behind because everyone else is starting to catch up.
Yeah, and I think the other thing for me is this is really good for it should be. I'm caveating this with that people do with the money and marketing and everything what they should, which is at this point the bare minimum, which they don't even hit most of the time. But I think it should be good for the development of the women's game. Now, a little bit of background: the Concacaf W Gold Cup was already going to be set up where you had basically USA, Canada, and then 6 other teams qualify. So we've had qualifiers before, and they were kind of extending. So those lower level teams have already played a series of games. So I'm not super concerned that they're not getting into the Gold Cup. You know what I'm saying? Like again, it's hard for me to be like if you were to pick 12 CONCACAF women's teams. I mean, we saw what the CONCACAF Women's Championship was this past summer. The quality just isn't. It's just not there. And it's really hard to go past the top 8 and find good quality. So it's just reality. Now, the hope is by playing these qualifiers, they increase their level, but this gives you 4 teams of a higher level. Hopefully means you're getting more eyes on the game, meaning more revenue from the tournament itself. And hopefully that money is then invested back into the women's programs individually, because again, you're talking about teams like Colombia, Argentina, Chile, especially, whose women's players have been very vocal about wanting their federation to step up to the plate. And this hopefully gives it both should give the federation no excuse, but also hopefully gives them that motivation to do so.
Yeah, it's a great partnership between the confederations. I think they both win on that. I mean,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, and it's gonna help, that exposure for the women's game and just provide better quality, matchups for in that tournament because I think this is the first.
Yes.
Yeah,
This is the first like true CONCACAF W Gold Cup that is a standalone, because a lot of
right.
times it's been tied into World Cup or Olympic qualifying or whatever. This will be the first one that is its own standalone tournament,
Right.
which I think is massive for women's football in this confederation, but also worldwide. We need more of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, the big ticket item right now, CONMEBOL's Copa America is coming to the U.S. in 2024. This is not a guarantee that the U.S. will be playing in it, although I feel like somehow that'll be a guarantee once they iron out the details. This is massive. At the end of this is what we've been wanting. This is what we've been asking for, and it made so much logistical and financial sense after 2016. They're running it back in 2024. I don't expect this to be. Obviously, there are a lot of extenuating circumstances as to why CONCACAF/the U.S. stepped up to host this particular edition, but the partnership of this, the inviting CONCACAF teams into CONMEBOL, hopefully we see that happen for the long term.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the U.S. Federation kind of screwed things up a little bit. A lot of people may not know this, but back, it was probably around the 2016. After that, the U.S. had wanted to start their own, theater tournament, and they were going to do it with the same timing as Copa America, and say, well, that's the same time as when they moved it to match to the Euros, and so they burned a lot of bridges at that in that moment. And so, because they wanted, they saw the success of what Copa America brought, and they saw the money. I mean, hands down, it's the most profitable Copa America that they've seen.
Yeah.
And so I see why they would want the money and want to do that. But they didn't go about it the right way. I think this is the men's
Yeah.
defenses. You know what I mean? It's not one thing, it's three things. And so, and that's that partnership. And I'm hoping
Yes.
it's a long-term thing. I think selfishly as a fan, I want to see US and Mexico in it every time. And then I do want to, honestly, selfishly, I want to see maybe, you know, a couple African nations or a couple Asian nations, you know, be
Yeah.
part of it as well. Because I think if you want to compete a little bit with the Euros, timing wise, you can run these tournaments in tandem, and you can be able to,
Right.
you know, and that's pretty much what did the last pass on that. And then you can have quality. It's like two separate tournaments. And you know what? I'd love to see the winner of the tournaments play each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you could
right. Can do that finalissimo that they had between the past year. But to your point, Copa America ran concurrently with Euro basically last summer.
the last pass. 2021, I think is when they played
thank
it.
you. That's when
Yeah.
they played it. Yeah.
But it's supposed to be 20. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was successful, at least from a Fox standpoint, because they had the broadcast rights for both, actually. It was very successful. I don't want Fox to continue to have broadcast rights for both, get them out of soccer broadcast in general, in my opinion. But it's very successful for both because it does position you against another high-level competition. And as I think we've seen, and obviously, you know, Argentina wins the World Cup this past year, they're very comparable in terms of the quality. Maybe not very comparable in terms of the intensity and meaningfulness of the tournament, and the passion in the stands, and the way that the players approach them. And I think if you're looking from a CONMEBOL's perspective, you're cutting out some of the lower tier teams. You're not necessarily removing them, but you're adding US, Canada, Mexico, a couple of better quality teams into your pool for your good teams to play. So it just makes it more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I think, yeah, and so that's why I want to see that another layer. I mean, you know, 16 teams is great. You know, to do that with, you know, kind of goes in line. But their format in the last one was a little weird too. I think they had groups of 5, so they ended up playing 4 groups.
Yeah, so that's the traditional thing that they do in Copa America is they play 2 groups of 5 because they have 10 teams. So, you know, this obviously alleviates that. So you're not having as many group matches. But I do, you know, I think you and I both see this as an opportunity to continue to do something like this in the future. That's the hope, right? That's what the whole point of hopefully this partnership is that you have this interconfederation tournament that is obviously mostly by one confederation, but you know, it would be fantastic in 2028 to have the US and, you know, hopefully qualify the US go down to whoever hosts it next in South America, you know, be it Chile or Uruguay or anything. That'd be fantastic to see. And a lot of US soccer fans would want to see that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love the Copa America tournament. I mean, I
fun.
tune in. Yeah, it's a fun tournament. I mean, and so, and you know, and I'll watch it if it's on. So I mean, and I honestly, selfishly, I love to have the last thing when you had soccer literally all day, the Euros, soccer, and then roll right into Copa America. I'm like, this is like a dream. You know.
I know. Well, and also I think it's good for the development of the game in this country because I think we've seen that U.S. soccer fans tune in. Actually, let me rephrase this. U.S. sports fans tune in to U.S. soccer games when they matter. You saw the ratings from this past World Cup. World Cup qualifying was pretty good ratings, but the game that we just saw against Colombia and the one we saw against Serbia, no one's tuning in for that. I'm sorry. I know no one wants to hear that. Those games don't mean anything. And I got to be honest, I doubt people are going to be tuning in for the Nations League games in March, right? But they will watch the USA-Mexico final. They will watch if the U.S. is playing Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela in a meaningful match, you know, because we as soccer fans are going to watch it. We're going to be talking about it. But casuals are going to know that that's a big game, you know?
Well, right. And I think, you know, unfortunately with the way the FIFA scheduling is, I think the only way the U.S. is going to get those competitive matches is to schedule them with you know, the CONMEBOL teams because they don't have that Nations League. They don't have that in play. Right. So we're going to schedule them pretty consistently. And I think it's an easier schedule for them than it is with some of the European teams. And trust me, they're going to try to do that. And I think they're going to, well, hopefully they're going to try to do that, because I think they have to put the money aside and say, for the better for this team is to get a window in Europe and play against,
Yes.
two of the African nations or two of the Asian nations, and get those, get those friendlies to be more, regular of a thing, and don't worry about the financial aspect behind it, because you've got to do what's best for the program, and you got to be a little bit selfish in that respect, because look, you're going to make plenty of money on this World Cup, so you're going to, as long as you don't have more lawsuits along the way, you're going to be able to, fill those coffers up and be able to, to have that in along the way. So I'm hopefully, we're going to see some of that smart movement in terms of that, because you're right, no one watches the, I mean, I watch everything, but no average fan, like, all my friends and family are like always, are messaging me, oh, well, great game, it's like, they're watching that when it matters. And so
Right.
you've got to get into those tournaments, you've got to be in those tournaments, the best thing. And so, from what you said about for 2025, if there's something in the US, that's a confederation type tournament, I mean,
Yeah.
that's just another opportunity to do that. And I think whoever's pushing that is doing a great job, because that's going to get the eyes.
Yes.
That's going to build it. You've got 4 years to do this, and you've already, in my opinion, you're already in the right direction with Copa America. You get this other piece, that potentially is there. I think they might hit the jackpot with that, and you're going to pull in a whole other group of fans, to the team, and maybe ones that are, as diehard as we are.
Well, I think we did hit the jackpot with these announcements, because they're going to be great things for our team specifically, as they compete in them. The people who did not hit the jackpot was anyone who watched these last two USMNT friendlies in the Camp Cupcake January friendly. Thomas, I got to be real honest. I didn't learn anything from these matches. I'm not trying to be like dismissive, but I was just like, soccer was played, and that's about all I can say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna plug. I just had an article it's on Chasing the Cup about kind of this a little bit, and this is kind of the timing of it is it works well with the conversation, because I think this first half of the cycle we have to focus on obviously getting a manager, and the youth teams in the World Cup, and then the Olympics. And so in the meantime, while we're kind of waiting for the youth players to step up, to be present, I think we have an opportunity to maybe use some of these bridge players to and again, to create that depth, to create that opportunity that we might need while we're waiting for some of these other youth players. Because some of these guys come in late, into the cycle at the end, and we're like, oh, here it is. I mean, Reyna's 20 years old, and in my mind, he was injured, but he's 20 years old. For him to be on that World Cup is impressive, with that in general. So you look at that progression in the age, so you got 18, 19-year-olds are going to play, in the U20s, maybe even the Olympics. Where does that put them right now? Their focus should be on those tournaments. And in the meantime, I thought I did have a couple positives. Juwan Jones, I thought was promising. He's 25.
Yeah.
I thought he was a player. I mean, I'm a little biased probably because I am a Revolution fan, but I thought he showed well.
The only good defender. The only defender who actually looked good. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and he was playing out of position, mind you. I mean, he usually plays the left side, and he's playing the right side.
I mean, he's he's a right-footed left back, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's a positive. That is a positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few others in there that I think you can probably take away, but it's a short camp. It's I don't even know how you prepare for it. I thought, honestly, I got to give the coach credit. I thought he did his best he could with what little he had to do.
And that's where I talk about, like, again, I'm not trying to dismiss it, but it's hard to learn anything because Anthony Hudson is an interim manager. It's not that. It's that he had 3 freaking days, I think, at most with these guys. And most of those guys didn't even really get in until like the day before the first game. You had Zendejas for all of like 3 days because he left after the first game. Like it was such a compressed window and kind of not thrown together because obviously these friendlies have been planned, but just like everything was not going to be a great environment for giving us great lessons, right? We weren't learning anything from these friendlies. USA lost to Serbia 2-1, tied Colombia 0-0. The only goal the U.S. scored was by Brandon Vasquez. Maybe that's a lesson, is that Vasquez scored. But even then, I don't think he looked particularly great outside of his off-ball movement, which was very good. But it's not like he did anything great in possession, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you can't expect a group of players that has really never been together to provide any sort of,
Most of whom who are out of season as well, by the
well,
way.
that's the thing. I mean, they're not informed. They're not in season. They're there again. The camp was generally longer because they're trying to get these players in
Right.
condition. So you didn't have that opportunity to do that. And so I think you take the wins where you can. I'll be honest with you, the roster excited me more than any roster we ever saw.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so because there was a good blend of some young players, a good play. They pulled some European players. They had a couple of players that were, one player from Mexico, one player from South America. So
Yeah.
that kind of excited me. Again, I've been following this for a very long time. So I'm kind of probably the exception on that, but for me, it's U.S. soccer. I'll watch it no matter what, but ultimately you're right. There's not a lot you're taking away from this. I think you say, geez, you've got 3 U20 players that you won't see
Absolutely.
for the next one, which is fine. And then you've got a few, again, as I call them, bridge players that I think have an opportunity
Yeah.
to be part of this cycle
Yeah.
in some form or fashion with some depth, and whether or not they make the most of it or not. But there's I think players like Yedlin and Shaq Moore, some of these other guys are going to fall off, and you got players like Jones who I think have an opportunity to be able to be a reserve position in there. So I think that's kind of what little you take from it at the end of the day. But it's it's a tough spot this year with the minimal camp that they had and all the other circumstances around it. So
Yeah, and I think to your point about certain we had several U20 players get time. Obviously, the one that I actually thought looked really good. We'll talk about Gaga in a second because he obviously is the one. But I thought Jalen Neal looked good. He also looks like a guy who I understand a little bit why he hasn't received a professional start from LA, but I also kind of question LA why he hasn't been forced into starting positions, because he looked good on the ball. And I think anything that he had problems with defensively were more about naivety, not necessarily skill or anything like that. I thought he looked good. I really want to say that I don't. What I'm having a problem with, and this isn't anything against these specific players, but as I mentioned earlier, I feel very confident that we have a two deep roster at just about every position. Maybe center back and defensive midfield, and definitely left back. But even then, we can get into semantics about what a backup left back is. So there are a couple of holes in the roster. So that's why I put in about 18 of the 23 that you would bring to a tournament. Those roster spots are pretty much solidified. I don't think there was anyone in this camp that demanded a call up to March, except for Gaga. And the only reason I say Gaga is because, as much as I personally like Sean Johnson, he doesn't need to be a part of the cycle anymore. And I'd rather just see if we get Gaga in. He'll obviously be allowed to leave from Chelsea. Why not just call him up? And I would rather start investing in that future than continuing to pour time into Sean Johnson. But other than Gaga, I'm not quite sure that anyone demanded a call up for March.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, Zendejas maybe. I think maybe he, and again, he wasn't overly impressive in the match.
No, but I can't fault him either, because what was he supposed to do that was going to impress me? Pass it to someone who then work a combination with someone? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, his last 20 minutes, I think, were a little bit more impressive in terms of what he was doing on the ball. But I mean, I love Gaga, but I think honestly, he's with the U20s and he's probably with the U23s,
and that's fair too,
for half the cycle. In my opinion, I think he's going to get playing time. And that's how that has to work, in my opinion.
Right.
But how they do that, how they structure that, I don't know. And that they've got to figure that out, because you have to, in my opinion, you have to bring that group all up together. I don't want to see a bunch of barely, eligible U23 players just because they're 23 and had a cap or two be part of the Olympic team.
Yeah.
Talk to the club, see what they're willing to release along the way, because you've got to find that out well beforehand so you can start building that and getting these guys into camp together and building that opportunity to do that. Because if you don't, then you're just going to play 3 games and you're going to be done.
Right.
And you have, I think that's where U.S. Soccer really has struggled to do that. I want to see them play in the Toulon tournament this year or in next year, like in France, like that they should be doing that on these cycle points. So you're getting that team playing.
And that's where anything that I have to say about Jalen Neal, Paxton Aronson, who I thought was fine, like whatever. They're U20 guys. Let them be U20 players. We have a World Cup in May. Gaga probably will be, like, if we have a U20 camp in March, which I hope they do for that FIFA window, then send Gaga to the U20 camp. I'm fine with that. Get them prepared for that. But no one else really, to me, looked like they are going to raise our floor. And to be quite honest, this is the point that kind of stuck out to me in a very negative way. This is from U.S. Soccer's game notes. All 5 rostered players from the 2022 FIFA World Cup squad started tonight. So all the guys who were on this camp roster who played in the World Cup started against Colombia, where we did not look great and did not score a goal. So Sean Johnson, whatever, he kept a clean sheet. Good. Long and Zimmerman also kept a clean sheet. Acosta and Jesus Ferreira. But, none of them were difference makers in the game. That's false. I think Sean Johnson was pretty good, but none of them were difference makers or elevated our play. And that to me is concerning and kind of a sign that we do need to find ways to move on from all of those players.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you would
move on from Paul Areola, by the way. Just need to throw that
and
in.
he was because he easily could have been there, as well. I think he was probably one of the 27th guy, honestly. But you're right. I think we're done with them, and I'm part of me hopes we never see them again.
And I don't mean that in a mean way. Thank you for your service, but
But at some point you have to transition from that. And so, and Klinsmann said it all the time, and I hated the way he said this. Well, someone would have to beat them out to the position. You have an opportunity where you don't have to qualify, so you can bring these players in, and you can get them.
I don't need Walker Zimmerman's or Aaron Long's experience at 2024 Copa America. I need CCV, Eric Palmer Brown, Miles Robinson, Chris Richards, that 4 core, who I think will be the core group of 4, and others. I'm sure there are others that I'm missing, but you know what I mean? I want those guys to be there. And I don't care that they don't have big game experience. That's the big game experience they're going to get.
Well, right. You do it right.
That's what March is for. Get them that big game experience in. I mean, I know it's Grenada, but I'd rather them do that than, not, and then have Walker Zimmerman and Aaron Long play against Grenada. What is that accomplishing?
Right. And that's the thing. And I think that when we go back to asking, well, is it critical to have a manager for this summer? That's the only part there that I would say. That's why you want it, because you want them to evaluate these players. You want them to get better looks. You want them to find the pairings, the partnership. Because let's be honest, I mean, the center back pairing was pretty surprising to me. With Ream starting. But
that one. Sorry.
With Ream, at the World Cup, that was surprising.
Yeah.
I would say, Ream was playing great for a club, and he still is. Yeah. And so, but it was surprising because we hadn't seen it, and it was a great move. You had to do it, and it paid off as far as I was concerned.
Right.
With that, and so, but now you have to find Ream's done. He's 35 years old. I mean, you're not going to play it.
If you bring in Ream for March camp because you need that experience, I'm more okay with that than bringing in Zimmerman and Long for experience. But I don't want to see him play.
Yeah, I think it's the same line with that. I just think you've got plenty of talent that should be able to beat these teams. So that's the thing. Right. You don't need that experience. Right. You have to gain it somewhere. And it's not I would rather see, just because they're the two I think at the top, CCV and Chris Richards start both March Nations League games against Grenada and El Salvador. Because I'll be, as much as it would suck to not make the final, it'll suck more for them to not get experience playing for the U.S. men's national team. Yeah. And they have to do that. I think it's a no-brainer. There's no question they've got to start doing that in those areas. Start saying thank you, but we need to try to find the backups. We need to try create that depth and be comfortable with that depth.
Give them the Summers Gold Cup to be the leaders of a younger team, hopefully preparing for that Olympics next summer. But I don't know if we have guys who'll be ready to play like Longer, Zimmerman at a Gold Cup level, whatever, fine. But I'm with you. We need to try to move on from them. And again, I don't think anyone in this camp necessarily showed that they're ready to displace any of them. That's the problem. We saw Aiden Morris look.
He had moments.
Good moments. Paxton Pomacall was not great.
That was disappointing.
I think Paxton was a victim of hype. People have been hyping him up for I feel like a decade at this point, and he just did not live up to it. But Jalen, like I said, Jalen Neal looked very good for a guy who's 19. That's his development track right now. And his goal right now is to perform well in the U20 World Cup, win a starting spot with LA Galaxy, and then go from there. It's not to start for the U.S. men's national team right now. Same with Jonathan Gomez. Honestly, same with Paxton, Aronson. That's just where the guys are at, and that's fine. That's fine. But no one in this camp even beat out the guys who were bad.
Yeah, but I wouldn't expect that to. I think going forward, we've discussed this. This camp needs to be defined and changed into something a little bit different.
1,000% agree. And it needs to be, and I'm okay with it being domestic. I truly am. If you're basing it on MLS guys, but you need to have an internal age restriction and a goal of this is the camp that we're trying to get as you mentioned, it's an unofficial U23 camp is what it turns into.
Yeah, and I'm okay seeing a Vasquez, because he hasn't been part of. You're going to have some of those guys in there that, again, my term, bridge player, that is going to be able to help the team a little bit, or you just want to see more from them because you either didn't have the opportunity during the last cycle to do that, and I think that's what that's for the most part is. But again, to see the Longs and the Zimmermans and Johnsons, all those guys, we've seen them, we know what they have to offer. I get why they're in this one because it's following the World Cup. But going forward, you need to you need to start refresh that again. When you can pull European players in, I think that was great. I was happy to see Gaga there. I was shocked because I as much as I wanted them there, I was surprised that they were able to make it happen.
Right.
I think that's a little bit telling.
But you also saw that we didn't get Kevin Paredes, and that's fine. But we were able to get Gaga and Jonathan Gomez and Paxton Aronson because they're still developing with their club, and that's fine. Great, we got them.
Yeah, and I think that's a win. I think ultimately that's a win from my perspective.
The positive of this tournament, or these two matches, were just that we got young guys playing time. That's it. That's great.
And that's what it should be for, to kind of get that exposure and get them in a little bit form before their domestic season. So.
Well, we've talked a lot about a lot of things, so let's cut it off now so we don't continue to ramble. Thomas, thanks for joining me. Tell us where we can find all of your stuff.
Follow me on Twitter at USKeeper, and as I mentioned earlier in the pod, I have a new article I wrote on Chasing the Cup called Bridging the Gap, just kind of about the players, some in this camp, some not in this camp, that can bridge the gap between the where the youth players are to between now and the World Cup. So look for that. I've got a couple other things I'm working on, so hopefully I'll have those out here soon enough. But that's where you can find me.
Well, again, thanks for joining me. Don't forget to follow the show at SoccerForUS Pod. Subscribe to Soccer down here for all of the content that comes out of the SGH network. And if you're feeling generous, support the podcast at buymeacoffee.com/SoccerForUsPod. Thanks for listening. I'm Bart. I'm out.